Hello, gorgeous, and welcome to the Women on Top podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and with over 15 years of business experience, I became truly passionate about finding ways to support and hear from way more women. And what we know to be true is that women thrive when they are in their favorite position, on top in business, in relationships, in personal growth, and on top in being real and authentic to who the hell they are. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy the Women on Top podcast. Okay, well, welcome back to the show, everybody. I have been looking forward to this conversation so much, and I have to just say, when I found this woman on social media, and I was just sharing this with her, I was looking at self-leadership. I've been really interested in this concept of women who are going first, who are leading themselves in a different way. And so I was kind of scrolling TikTok one day and looking for women who were talking about leadership in a different way that didn't feel boxy and stuffy and boring. And I came upon Olesya. And so Olesya Luraschi, I have her sitting with me, and she is a leadership and performance coach with a graduate degree in psychology from Harvard University. So this woman knows her stuff front and back, and she brings such a deep understanding of psychology and coaching that really helps guide leaders and organizations in a different way that helps them perform at their peak. And just, she brings also just a ton of industry experience across the board and has helped hundreds of leaders, hundreds of people. And I'm just so excited. I'm so flattered she said yes. And with that, welcome to the show, Olesya. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Valerie. Well, I'm happy to be here. I feel like a little bit like blushing from that intro. Like, who is that person? I want to meet her.
That's exactly what I thought when I came across your profile. Who is this woman?
Wait. That's not the experience I have of myself, but cool.
Oh gosh. Well, I have so many questions for you. It's going to be a challenge for me to keep this succinct.
I love questions. That's how my mind like thinks best. Like, I need questions to like generate information. So please.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about podcasting too, is we get the opportunity. It's one of those unique times that I get the opportunity to go deep with guests who, we don't normally have these conversations like in the grocery store. If I was to just meet you at a coffee shop, I wouldn't be asking you, what you want your legacy in life to be, but we get to do that today. So I want to start out with something that's kind of unique. I was watching an interview with you. And this was done a little while back, but you made a comment that I thought was really interesting. And you were sharing about how you were in the marketing world and I think working with tech companies. And you had this kind of revelation that you didn't want to die as a marketer and that you didn't want to like share that with your kids, or you were thinking about your kids with all of this. And I think your legacy truly did come up when you had that thought. And so I would love to have you kind of touch on that. And how was it that you followed your intuition and your gut to get involved in psychology?
Right. So yeah, I think it kind of relates to like people sometimes do this like the obituary exercise.
Yeah.
Where you kind of like write your obituary, and I'm Eastern European, so I'm kind of dark like that. And
love it.
And that, like, I don't know, it just made sense to me. And I mean, I have nothing against marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great profession. I enjoyed it for many years. And I think sometimes though we go into these professions that are almost like adjacent to what we're meant to do. And I think marketing was that for me.
Yeah.
I think maybe if I was a bit more self-actualized, maybe if I had different influences in my life, I would have gone into psychology as my first profession. But it took me kind of into that journey, and I realized like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And when I want to look back upon my life, I imagine doing something different. And when I talk to my kids about my life, I imagine me telling them something different. And it was like a very strong feeling for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm someone that really makes the decisions based on feelings. Like I'm a very emotional person. Like sometimes I can't even explain why I want to make a certain decision, but just is what it is. And I've kind of learned to live with that and not judge it necessarily.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So you're really good at just trusting your intuition to drive you forward. I think that applies also with your relationship, if I remember correctly, that you found your significant other pretty easily and really just trusted yourself that this was the right person for you.
Yeah, we met in February. We got married in August.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Is that how you envisioned yourself? Like, I guess when you were a little girl, did you think
No, no,
meet
no, no.
somebody
I
and then just,
totally thought I'd be like a normal person that like met a significant other at like 26 and then got married at like 29 or something. Like
yeah,
that
yeah.
that was the idea in my mind.
I love it. So, what was it that was an indicator to you? Because I'll just share this from my own personal experience. I don't think I was totally in tune with my intuition, but I had a marriage that didn't go so well. And I did also do the same thing of getting involved really quickly and we got married really quickly. But I didn't know myself. So I think that's the key difference was I don't think I was grounded enough. I don't think I was centered enough to truly like make the right decision. I was just jumping into the next right thing, or so I thought at the time. So, what was it for you that you knew without a shadow of a doubt, like, this is the right path for me?
I don't think we ever really know what the right path is, to be honest. I think a lot of people like to sit and say that, like, oh, I made the right decision. But honestly, I think it was like a toss-up. Like, I followed what I thought was right, and it seems to be right for now.
Yeah.
But, like, I really believe that, life is chaotic and uncertain, and we actually never really know what the right decision was.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, like, I like to think about it like a psychological study, right? So, like, if we imagine that each of our lives was a psychological study and we had to identify the variables that led to certain aspects like happiness or fulfillment or success, like, we wouldn't be able to alienate those variables. And
Mm,
we wouldn't be able to even like look back upon a life after someone passes and say, like, it was exactly this.
yeah.
Like,
That's,
there's no possible way of doing that. I think it's just really messy and chaotic and complex. And I guess kind of embracing that that's the way it is the only way forward.
yeah. That's such a good point. And I've heard somebody somehow articulate something similar that you don't ever really know, but you just have to kind of choose in the moment what you think is right. And now, of course, looking back, I realize how much that experience taught me. And
Mhm.
it was meant to happen for so many other reasons. But of course, at the time, you're thinking, gosh, do I not know how to trust my intuition? So I think that kind of leads me to my next question is how do you help the clients that you work with trust their intuition and guide them through that when maybe sometimes they don't know, is it my intuition or is it just me seeing a shiny object?
Right. And you mentioned that most of your audience is female,
Yes.
right? Okay. Probably all.
Yes.
Okay.
The occasional
Right.
like man might listen to it, but yeah, it might be
Right.
just
So I think in my experience, and obviously this isn't across the board because there's a lot of variability in gender and how we, experience gender. But in my experience, there typically is a bit of a difference between men and women when it comes to this. So, my male clients do tend to have kind of more of a risk of alexithymia, which is essentially emotion blindness.
Hmm.
So basically, like, you tend to present as a highly logical person, and sometimes you can't even experience like emotions, or you experience them in very like shallow ways. My female clients, they typically don't have that much of a risk of that, but what they tend to have is what's called hyperempathy.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of hyperempathy in women. And I think this is kind of just maybe like a cultural conditioning. Like, women are very much taught that empathy is very important and it's a value we should have. We should take care of others. We should consider their feelings, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to intuition, sometimes this gets us in trouble because we're so good at sensing other people's emotions
Yeah.
that I've found that for a lot of us, it's almost like difficult to understand, like, what do I want and what do other people want? Like, what does my team want? What does my boss want? What does my spouse want? What do my kids want? And then what do I actually want? And for a lot of women, I think like what I want is like like a very like it's like a whisper while all of the other things are like shouting,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yeah. How do you help people listen to that whisper? Like, how do we cut out some of that noise? That's a very broad question, I realize, but what are some of the, top couple of ways, I guess, that you could advise us?
Right. So, when it comes to like, we call this hyper empathy, which basically means like you're the type of person that walks into the room
Hmm.
and you can sense everyone else's emotions in the room. You're nodding your head, so I'm guessing you've had that experience. And I found that a lot of women who are successful have this trait. Like, this is very common. And it's almost like having, to me, at least the way I like to explain it, it's like having a superpower that you're bad at controlling. Right.
Right.
Like it can kind of harm you, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this amazing superpower, but you're not good at like leveraging it at the right times. And so what happens, I think, for a lot of people is because the hyper empathy is so strong and it's also so like culturally valued that we almost have like an atrophy of what like the internal state is. So like I like to refer to this as self-blindness, where
Oh,
it's like I don't know what's going on in myself because I'm so good at focusing externally.
yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a training that has to happen. So typically for a lot of my clients that do have this, and it doesn't have to be just women, men can have this too.
Mhm.
We need to actually like repeat, like we need to do some type of practice and we're going back into ourselves and actually asking like, what do I want? What do I value? What do I like? And even having like even 10 minutes a day where we feel that, we consider that, we work on that.
Yeah.
Because it really is almost like it's similar to me, like a muscular atrophy, right? Like if somebody doesn't walk for like 10 years, their muscles are going to be atrophied. If someone doesn't think about themselves for 35 years or however, 20 years, like, and they hyper focus on other people's emotions, they're not going to be good at that.
Yeah. Gosh, it makes me think of, I feel like I've gotten better, but I'm thinking to a different time in my life where I really didn't feel like I could tell you what I really liked or what I really wanted.
Yeah.
And it felt kind of just like, oh my gosh, I don't even know. Do I like that or not? I don't know. And it almost was this like numb feeling. So being out of touch with emotions, I'm still working on that piece. So all of this definitely resonates where it is like a muscle, but we don't think of it that way.
No, we don't. Yeah, and it's that continuous going back to wait, like what do I like? What do I want? And it
Yeah.
sounds almost like silly to say, but I think for it's such like an attractive quality in the corporate world to have hyper empathy. Like, because it gets you pretty far. Like it's very like it's very helpful for the team, it's helpful for the manager, it's helpful for everything. So it's
Yeah.
easy to not focus on what you want or what you think or what you like.
Totally, totally. And I feel like for somebody maybe too who grew up and was always paying attention to the emotions of their family or their caregivers or whoever they grew up with,
Mhm.
that probably was only amplified if they then went into a corporate job. And now, those skills are great to have, but you're like doubling down on focusing
Yeah,
it on
yeah,
other
yeah. Well,
people.
you're kind of like almost like utilizing your trauma, right? So it's like, I mean, most of my clients like do have some aspect of trauma because I think it does drive the high performer. And when I say trauma, I don't mean just like, the classic things we
Mhm.
think of. Like at this point, the statistic is that like about 65% of the population can qualify as traumatized.
Wow.
And so when I say trauma, what I mean is essentially you had an experience in your life where your mind overlearned
Mm,
that there's some type of danger.
interesting.
So it's an overlearning response. And hyperempathy is then therefore an overlearning response that I need to track the emotions of other people
Yeah.
to create a stable world for myself or to create some type of safety.
Gosh. So okay, trauma is kind of related to high performers, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Because I mean, if you think about it, it's like the fuel, right?
Yeah.
So why do you need to prove yourself that much?
Mm,
Why do you need to put yourself last? Why do you need to make sure everyone else is okay? Why
interesting.
do you need to give so much
Yeah.
to make people value you?
Yeah.
Like, why? And usually, like, it's like some kind of,
Yes.
yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you grow up in like a bad family environment. It could be all kinds of things. Like I've seen, like the immigrant experience can lead to trauma. Even like bullying can lead to trauma. Like just feeling different can lead to trauma. Like there's all kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. To your point, it doesn't have to be like this crazy scenario that you grew up in. But that's so fascinating that, just you asking those questions of like, why do you need to perform so well? Why do you need to,
Yeah,
what is
yeah.
it that you're doing this for? Do you consider yourself a high performer? I would assume so, but
I mean, I don't think I have like a judgment like the way you would. Like I don't have a evaluation criteria that the way you would in like a corporate setting, because in a corporate setting you typically have some kind of assessment for that. But yeah, I do feel like I've had these aspects in my life. One time my husband and I had a really interesting conversation that really showed me like, oh, I am not normal in this. Basically, like I have this tendency to like overdo things, overwork, like push myself to the point where it's like I'm not functional. Like, and he's like, please stop. Like, please stop taking so much on. Like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I don't know how to not. And I'm like, teach me how to not. And he's like, well, I just do things. And then when, like I feel like I've done enough, I stop. And I'm like, whoa. Like, tell me more. He's like, yeah, like I feel like I've done a good enough job and I like, I go rest. And I'm like, interesting. And I'm like, and then I realized I'm like, I don't think I've ever felt like I've done a good enough job. And I was like, I feel like I only would feel like I did a good enough job if I like died doing the job. And then I would know. I'd be like, okay, that was a good enough job
yeah.
because I couldn't do anymore.
Guess we tapped out. Guess now,
Yeah, like that was
yeah.
it. That was the limit there. And I was like, oh, that's not. And I'm like, okay.
So true. Yeah. I relate in the sense of like it's really hard for me to rest. So I'm
Yeah,
working on that
exactly.
actively. Like, okay.
It's like there's no like mechanism to like figure out like, okay, and that's the self-blindness, right? Because you have no idea what you feel.
Yeah.
Like there's no like there are like all of these internal mechanisms that we have that tell us like, hey, stop this. Like don't do any more. Stop, stop, stop. But for those of us that kind of have this like, hyper empathy slash self blindness, like we don't perceive it.
Yeah.
And it can manifest as burnout, it can manifest as anxiety, it can manifest as sleep problems, even like physical problems. And the mind and the body are trying to tell you things, and you're just like,
I don't see it. Yeah.
Wait, should I just work harder?
Yeah. Right. Until you're
Yeah,
just like so done or you get sick or something happens.
exactly. Yeah, for me, it's like I totally like would like catch a cold like every other week, and I'm like, why is this happening?
And I hate it because I can't keep working, right? Like, because
I'm
you're
like,
like
this is
not
so
feeling well.
annoying.
I think
Yeah.
most people, most women listening to this definitely relate on some level, which makes me also curious. Are there other traits like this hyper empathy that you come across with high performing, especially women, high performing women that you're like, oh gosh, that's like a pattern that I'm seeing a lot?
Yeah, I tend to see like we were just saying, like physical symptoms, right?
Mm,
So like that could be like IBS, that could be migraines,
yeah.
um, things like that, right? So it's
Right.
like kind of like, why is this happening? I don't know, right? Like sleep
Mhm.
problems, um, like kind of like things that maybe you didn't put together that like it's the same thing,
Right.
right? Um, and a lot of like just a lot of like ownership that tends to happen. So it's like the opposite of the people that blame other people for their problems. right? So
Yeah.
it's like you take on like too much. Like there's like too much responsibility. So for a lot of my clients, I have to teach like shared responsibility,
Mm,
where it's like, hey, let's figure out like what part of this is your responsibility and what part of it isn't, right?
right.
Because
Yeah.
like it's almost like taking on a lot of responsibility that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily your responsibility. And that doesn't mean just in work, it means almost like in the emotional caretaking and like all kinds of facets of life, where it's
Hmm.
like you're just taking on a lot, like a lot, a lot. And it's it's not shared, right? It's not equal.
Yeah. That's so interesting. That kind of goes hand in hand with being a high performer too. But I'm guessing we make up a lot of stories in our head about why we should own something versus like, did somebody actually tell you you needed to do all of this? Or are you just
Right.
making some of that up?
Right. And it's like it's a difficult thing because it's like these are some of the traits that get you where you are, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
at the same time, I really believe in there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, right? And so basically it's a bell curve with a
Mhm.
relation on a XY axis. One axis is stress, one axis is performance.
Okay.
Okay. So, and then you can imagine the bell curve. Everyone can Google this. It's very available.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind the Yerkes-Dodson law is that there is an optimal relationship between stress and performance.
Mm,
So if we have really low stress, performance is low. If we have really high stress, performance is low. But there is, for everyone, there's an optimal ratio. And so I think what a lot of my clients have done is that they've realized, hey, if my like stress, if my arousal is low, I don't perform,
mm,
which
yeah.
is true. Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
But then they kind of overcompensate the other way, where they go into that really high stress zone and they're kind of teetering on the low performance, where they're like, where they're seeing declines in performance, where whether it's burnout, whether it's anxiety, whether it's sleep problems, um, whether it's even like imposter syndrome type of thing, where it's like almost like self-sabotaging behavior,
Right.
right? And so you're creating psychological stress for yourself, and you're realizing that that does impact performance, but that only impacts performance to a certain degree. And we do need to usually diminish the psychological stress to get optimal performance.
Mm. You know, you mentioned also imposter syndrome. This is a big one I hear come up a lot for women, especially women in leadership positions or who are accelerating through the ranks. But I've heard both sides of this. I'm curious what you think. Is it a real thing? Because sometimes people say, oh, imposter syndrome isn't really real. And other people are referring it to it as an actual syndrome, right?
Right. So it's not like an actual syndrome in the DSM, which is the like psychiatric diagnostic criteria, right? So there isn't an actual disease that you could put on an insurance form that says this person has a imposter syndrome. So maybe you'd put like adjustment disorder, or you'd put generalized anxiety disorder. It depends, but imposter syndrome is a way of talking about a phenomenon that's happening in the workplace or even in academia that has certain symptoms that correlate with certain mental disorders, but it is not a mental disorder. It's essentially a phenomenon that happens that impacts somebody's ability to perform and their ability to kind of have well-being.
Yeah.
It's the same as burnout, right? Like burnout is not a psychiatric diagnosis. It's not a
True.
psychological diagnosis, but it does sort of like map onto depression. It has very similar symptoms, but
Mm,
the cause is different. And typically, the treatment can be different as well because burnout usually subsides if the thing causing burnout is removed. So it's
right.
almost like the way I like to think about burnout is it's an environmental depression. And imposter syndrome is like an environmental anxiety disorder.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard it phrased like
Right.
that.
Because imposter syndrome increases the more that the faster you go in your rise
Yeah.
up the hierarchy or up whatever kind of system you're in. So
Yeah.
the faster you're kind of rising, the more susceptible you are to imposter syndrome.
Wow. I love this. This makes
Right.
so much sense. Just in especially how I've heard it and this is why I love your content. So for people out
Yeah, I
there
like to
who
kind of go to the bare bones, right? So like, right. So if you think about anxiety, anxiety is essentially a fear disorder, right? Your fear system is highly sensitized, overly sensitized
yeah.
to the point in which you're not accurately perceiving the world
Hmm.
on how much you should fear it.
Totally.
Right. So imposter syndrome is kind of a component of that in which your fear system has been overly sensitized because you essentially feel like, like you don't know what you're doing because you rose so quickly, right?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the same time, one of the other aspects that makes people vulnerable to imposter syndrome is how many minority check boxes they can check. So, are
Mm,
you a woman?
mm.
Are you part of a minority group? If you can check those, then you're more susceptible to imposter syndrome, which makes a lot of sense again, because there's a fear component here because we're not seeing representation.
Right.
So
Right.
like, my amygdala should be stimulated because I'm not seeing people like me, right?
Yeah. Right. Which does trigger fear, of course, because
Exactly, right. So it makes a lot of sense. It's like, okay, I'm doing things that I've never done before. I haven't proven myself to myself yet.
hmm
I don't see a lot of people like me here. Like I have one particular client, she can check a few minority check boxes, and
right.
she's in where she's working in an industry that's predominantly male. She doesn't see anyone like her.
Mm.
And that has an impact on the mind where it's like, okay, why am I the only one here, right? Like,
Yeah. Right.
and I have to be way better than average. I have to be way better than these
Prove
other
myself.
people
Right.
because, I'm the odd man out, odd woman out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of feel like you have to prove yourself, is what I was thinking of. Just like, how can I keep? And that, of course, leads to all the other things we're just talking about. So, um, yeah, the way that you made sense of that just helps me so much in my mind, like paint the picture of what this really is, because we hear of these things. And of course, we talk a lot about burnout, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, but actually, like, correlating it to what's going on in our minds is super helpful.
Right. And like these two things are environmental, right? Because we know that there are environmental causes of burnout, like where there's like lack of autonomy in
Yeah.
the workplace causes burnout, right? And lack of resources, lack of support. So these are things that could actually be improved on by the organization. So
Yes.
if we had certain support systems in place, then we could actually improve imposter syndrome. We could improve burnout. And that's why it's not exactly the same as like depression or anxiety because
Mhm.
it's environmental. Like the organization has responsibility here as well. The manager has responsibility, right? Where
Totally.
it's like, there does need to be a feedback mechanism. There probably does needs to be some type of mentorship when someone goes into a new role. You can't
Mhm.
just like let them like float around by themselves, right? Like,
Yeah, which so many companies just do and
yeah,
hope they
yeah, they
figure it
do.
out, right?
Hey,
Yeah.
do a good job or you'll get fired. Bye.
And then they hire you because they're like, help. um, so what is it about psychology that means something so deeply to you? Because I see we have other executive coaches, but they don't have this passion around psychology specifically. So what is it for you?
Well, for me, I think it's really important to get to the root cause, right? So, like for example, like I have had lots of clients that have struggled speaking up in important meetings, right? And, they could go to a communication coach and they could be taught exactly what to say,
Right.
exactly how to say it, like perfectly, like exactly the right words.
Hmm.
Will they do it? Probably not. And the reason for this is what I found, a lot of communication problems stem from implicit memory,
Mm.
which basically means that individuals had some type of very like fear-inducing event in their lifetime. or they come from like a cultural aspect that provided them with a lot of fear around speaking up.
Yeah.
And I found that a lot with like certain clients from certain parts of the world. And essentially, what happens is implicit memory is not available to us in the conscious. Like in the conscious
Mm.
state, we don't access that. And so, what it feels like for my clients is they're in a meeting, there's important people around, right? They know they should speak up because they've been told this by their manager, like, hey, like, speak up your ideas. Otherwise, like, like you look like you don't know what you're doing. And they think about it and they're like, I'm going to do it. But then they freeze
Uh, yeah.
and they have no idea why they freeze.
Right.
And they're like, shoot, I listened to like 20 podcasts about communication. Why am I not saying all the things I know, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Like, I read all the books, I
Yeah.
followed the Stanford professor. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And these people are like super, super smart. A lot of them have like MBAs from like really fancy schools. And they're still like, why can't I speak up in the meeting?
Yeah.
And it's because this is like a fight, flight, freeze response. Like
Mhm.
this is beyond the logical mind. This is the body reacting to
Yeah.
some type of implicit memory, right? And
Right.
implicit means that we don't have awareness of it.
Right.
So this is all of those things where it's like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And like that's what to me psychology is. It's like we all have this like phenomenon. I don't think I've ever met someone that doesn't, where we look at ourselves, we look at our own behavior and we're like, what the hell? Like, why am I doing that? Like, what's wrong with me? And each day we're like, I'm going to do something different. And then we wake up the next day and we keep doing it. And to
Right.
me, that's what's like so interesting. I think like humans are fascinating. And there's some psychologists that believe that 90% of our decisions are fueled by the subconscious.
Yes.
And that's terrifying.
Yeah. I know. Because what's actually going on in there?
Right, because I think a lot of us, we think that we're so hyper logical and we make such like really interesting arguments for all of our behavior. But I don't think we're as logical as we think, because otherwise we wouldn't have this phenomenon where we're just like constantly like,
Right.
why am I doing that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Like, and to me, like that's kind of why I'm just always going to be fascinated with it. I think it's the greatest puzzle in like history, right? Like
Yeah.
in the world, like human beings are the greatest puzzle to me.
I love that. Looking at it kind of like a puzzle. And does this fit in with what we talked about at the very beginning, like your legacy and kind of when you do think of what you're leaving behind or what you're doing with your life, do you feel like you're on that journey now? Like, does psychology really feel like that's what you were meant to do is help people with all of these things?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love this job. I mean, obviously it's like any job, like where sometimes I'm tired and I just want to take naps all day, but let's be honest, that's every day.
Yeah.
But to me, like the goal is to like diminish human suffering,
Mm,
right? And so like if I can contribute to that, then I'm happy. And to me, like one of the most influential things that I've ever done is to obtain my psychology degree, right? And that was like one of the most healing things that I've ever experienced is because I think I am like a very curious person and I can be very like academic, I suppose. And so understanding to me, like understanding why I do the things I do, like that like fixes like 90% of the issue for me. And
mm,
I find that a lot of my clients are like that too. Like once we understand why, it's like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like kind of the shame is gone, the judgment is gone, and I'm kind of able to work with this because I get it. Like it makes sense to me now.
yeah.
And
Right.
like I want to kind of recreate that experience for other people. And I think that's kind of what you see on TikTok, where it's like I want people to like have that like aha moment where it's like, oh, okay. I understand myself a little bit better. And in that understanding, I'm able to kind of change to what I want to be doing. And I'm also kind of able to lift some of that, like maybe judgment, maybe fear, maybe, like shame that we have around our behavior.
Yeah. What a beautiful reason why. And I just love what you said about going through the degree and the education yourself and how it was a healing experience. That was not the
Yeah.
answer I was prepared for you to give. So I,
Well, of course. So there were a lot of times of me like crying about a neuro paper because my professor was really tough. I loved her so much, but there are many tears, many tears.
yeah, in all aspects. But I'm sure I don't know why I didn't even think about it. I'm just thinking about it from the books and the paper side of things. But there was so many of the aha moments for you being able
Yeah,
to
yeah,
go
yeah.
walk through that journey and then to have this legacy of I just want to give that back to other people is really beautiful. So I want to hear about the content creation though, because not all psychologists are out on TikTok. What was it that inspired you? Was it that exact thing? How can I get this out to more people? Or how did you decide to start showing up on social media?
Well, you have to remember that my background is in marketing.
Yes.
So I also like, my practice is also a business and I can't not think of it that way. And so, like, in a way, I am the brand, right?
Right.
And so I really, really, really hate sales. So,
Very interesting. Marketer hates sales.
I mean, it's the classic, classic dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm like, okay, well, this is a business and I do need to sell, right? And, I do like intro calls and things like that. And I treat it as a psychologist. I'd never treat it as a business person. I'm like, hey, how can I help you in the next 30 minutes?
Hmm.
And if you think that's helpful, then cool, let's work together. If not, then, I wish you the best.
Right.
And so I realized, like, if you keep doing all these intro calls, you're going to burn out.
Right.
So you need to scale in some way. So that's how I started doing the videos. And I first started on YouTube, which kind of is like equipment heavy, which I
Hmm.
never loved because I just don't love setting up all that equipment. And so eventually just moved to TikTok and I was like, you know what? I can just film little videos on my phone. If like one person benefits from this, then it's worth it. And that's what I'll do.
Wow. And now you have a pretty amazing following. You've got some awesome content out there, of course. And I'm curious though, do you see yourself as a content creator or do you see that helping feed the business? I just was looking at it thinking if you could pick one, would you want to keep being a
Yeah, I
content
mean, I
creator or
really
would
see
you?
myself as a psychologist. Obviously, I don't work with like mental disorders. I work in like that high performance space. But that's really like the core of me. I only really talk about being like an influencer when I'm joking about it. Like I make fun of myself.
It's great though. I think it's refreshing. And that's why I really was attracted to your content too, is because you're taking concepts like what you just did in this podcast. You've done it so many times, is you take something and you break it down where I'm like, oh, that's exactly what's happening. And that's what you're doing for the general public. And I also feel like you're relatable. You're not doing it with, again, you're not like stuffing yourself in the corporate jargon box and doing it with so many terms that we don't understand
No, I don't
what
think
you're
I could do
saying.
that. I think you're giving me too much credit.
No, I'm saying I'm glad you don't. Like I'm so glad that you show up as a human on there and that it just feels like you're showing up in a very human way, in a very genuine way. So
Well, see, I
um
don't think I could film the content if I didn't, right? Because like when I first started, like, and I still do this sometimes, I have to tell myself, like, okay, just film like a really shitty video. And like, if it's okay, it's okay. If it's not, like, people aren't forced to watch this. Like, and like
yeah.
that's the way I had to like frame it in order to get rid of like the nerves. And
Mm.
so like I still to this day, like I'm like, I don't know why people watch this shit, but like
Oh my gosh, you are so funny. There's like
So that's the way I
articles.
have to approach it because
Uh,
like yeah, I can't like, otherwise I get nervous, right?
yeah.
I'm like, well, that's hilarious that people watch this. I'm glad like there is some benefit to it. But like
Yeah.
every time I see myself on the feed, I'm like, oh no, guys, no, not her again.
That's really good advice though for people. It's kind of like just go out there and make something and just tell yourself it's going to be not maybe the greatest and just see what happens versus
Yeah,
over.
yeah. I mean, I had to do that for like probably like a few years there where it was like time to film something shitty. Okay, let's go.
Well, okay, now you're having articles written about you because you
I don't know
do
why
have
that happens.
but it's
I'm
so
like the Daily Mail really must be lacking in content.
but these are like positive articles. They're talking about, some of these questions that you're posing, like the miracle question about finding happiness that went viral. And
None
so
of this stuff is like my own, and I hope I do a good job crediting and like make. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody actually knows where that one comes from, but it's like it's a thing in psychology, like right. It's not like it's like a known thing.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But still, I think it's really great that okay, can you remind our listeners about what this miracle question is about
Right.
happiness?
So, if I remember it correctly, because like a lot of people will quote things to me that I said, and I'm like, I don't remember saying this. Um, if I remember correctly, it's like I forget the time span, but it's like if you were to wake up in wait, which one is it? Is it the one that's like if you could wake up in
Yeah.
5 years and have anything you want, what would it be?
Yeah, just something to the effect of like it asks people to envision what their lives would be, what would be different in their lives if they woke up happy or something along that
Oh
line.
yeah, yeah. Like if you woke up happy tomorrow, what would be the difference? Like what would be different in your life?
Mm,
Or like how would you be different? And I think, yeah, it kind of it focuses more on like the positive, right? The change, the wanting. And I think that's the issue that a lot of us have these days, where we're like focusing on trying to fix something
yeah.
that maybe it doesn't even need to be fixed. And we actually don't know what we want, right? Like, what's the positive opposite?
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, like I know all of the things I don't want, but I have no idea what I do want.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The positive opposite. I really like that. And even I'm just thinking of the simple things. Like if you woke up happy, I'm thinking of just like the contentment and how can I build that in more? How can I how can I read the book and just create some of that in my life a little bit more? Just the easy things. I mean, and like you said, not the worry some things that we kind of make up. Um, and just, yeah, what's the positive opposite of that? I really like that.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like a reverse engineering of like your ideal state, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that perspective. I can't believe we are like,
Oh,
looking at the
yeah.
time. I'm like,
I
oh
know.
my gosh.
I could talk for like a whole other hour.
I know. I was like, what is going on? The time has just flown by. I knew this was going to happen.
Maybe a part two
We
is
need part
in the
two.
future.
Yeah, definitely. So I always like to close my episode asking the guest to leave a piece of advice or just something that they feel like sharing to for the next guest, not knowing who it is. So I'd like to share what the last guest shared and then give you the opportunity to do the same. So the last guest I interviewed just said, you don't have any competition. You're not playing a game against anybody else. Your greatest competition is actually yourself. The only person that controls what you do is you, and you don't have to worry about losing the game because you literally have no competition. The more you practice, the more you sharpen your tool, the better you improve, and everybody wins. And I thought that was just a good thing to leave. I know you are already doing that. We kind of just left on that, actually talking about social media and kind of tuning out some of that and working on that. But thank you, again, just for being here and anything that you would like to share with the audience or kind of, with that next
So,
guest.
yes, for the next guest. Okay, yeah. Um, so obviously I work a lot in like even like the deeper aspects of the human mind, right? The kind of things that the most of us don't want to share with other people that maybe even we're ashamed of. And so to me, I one of the things that I think is really important to understand and to accept about ourselves is that we always have the best of intentions. And I truly believe that. And so even when we're doing the behaviors that we don't like, when we're doing behaviors that we're ashamed of, those are parts of our mind trying to protect us.
Mm.
And they have the best of intentions. And when we know that and we accept it and we integrate those parts, that's when we can really change. So none of us can really hate, none of us can change hating parts of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so, it's so perfectly said and such a beautiful way to end the conversation. And I think just is gonna not like let people off the hook, but kind of like, okay,
Right.
you know
Yeah,
what?
like we can't integrate ourselves by like ostracizing certain parts, right? So it's like understanding that, we have protectors and they're trying their best.
Yeah, that is so true. That everything and everyone has the best of intentions, even those parts, those dark parts, those shadow parts that keep showing up. Like you said, they're trying to protect you from something. Oh, that's so perfect. Thank you for that perspective. And everything that you've shared has just been really, really profound. And I knew this was going to be just so jam packed. So, final thing before we close all this out, where can people find you? Obviously, TikTok and Instagram, but specifically, where can they find you?
Yeah, yeah. So TikTok, Instagram, basically I try to post all the videos on there. And if you have a question that you want to ask me, please message me on Instagram. I try to answer the questions. If I don't, I'm sorry. But that's the place that I'm best at like managing the messages, because anyone who uses TikTok knows that the TikTok messaging system is a little bit tricky to keep track of.
Perfect. And I'll drop the links in the show notes for everybody too, so they can easily find you. And once again, just have to say, I'm just so deeply honored and humbled to be joined by you here on the show today. And you,
It's just me.
I know, but I really do feel grateful. And I love how you show up. I feel like you're going first and doing something really different by creating the content that you do and helping people in so many different ways. And so I just wanted to say, like, thank you so much. This has been really meaningful
Right back
and
at
valuable. Yeah.
I had the best time chatting with you.
Thank you for tuning into the show today. And before you go, I just have one quick favor to ask of you. There is a really simple way that you can help support me and help support this show, and that is to hit that follow button on whatever app you're listening to the show on. I'm trying really hard to level up the content and deliver unique value and amazing guests, and just hitting that follow button is the magic that will help continue to empower that. And remember that the world deserves to hear your voice and your stories, and you deserve a place at the top.